Industrial hygiene is rocket science in my world. I'll compare the universe of industrial hygiene to NASA and how they deal with exposures to hazards in outer space. I've been involved with industrial hygiene since 1985, probably a lot longer than a lot of you have been alive. I became certified as an industrial hygienist in 1995, and I've never looked back. But industrial hygienists, we focus on what we call AREC, A-R-E-C, for anticipate, recognize, evaluate, and control hazards to the workers. It really is rocket science. In 1917, the watch dial painters, they didn't anticipate the dangers of the radioactivity of the radium paint they were using to paint watch dials. Many of them died at a very young age. However, there was a lady named May Keene who died in 2014. She was 107 years old. But she didn't paint dials for very long. There's a play called The Radium Girls by this D.W. Gregory that covers their story. A tank truck is carrying flammable materials, and you get the call. You need the knowledge about tank trucks and chemical exposures to be able to deal with this thing. The local fire chief, he has to know the hazards of a tank that made blevy. A blevy is a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, and it happens to cars that are under pressure. If you look at this picture, that's a 300-foot water tower. In the bottom of that picture, that cloud is 2,000 feet high. It was a propane rail car that blevied. Many times you can recognize what the hazards are. Sometimes you can't. Carbon monoxide is tasteless, odorless, and you can't see it, even at deadly levels. But what do you expose the exposure to be if you want to get close to a couple of these cuties? NASA has to recognize the hazards to protect their crews. So we use our 6 senses. Can you see something? Can you smell it? Does it make any noise? Can you hear it? Can you feel it on your skin, the tingling? Any taste in your mouth? And so when you get real good at this, it takes ESP to recognize the hazards. Placards and labels, which are used commonly in industry, is a great way to recognize a hazard. A placard, like on the left, will only give you a rough idea what it is, but the label gives you that detailed information on what these hazards of this chemical are. Physical hazards are not rocket science. If it's cold out, you're cold. If it's hot out, you're hot. And here in Maine, we get temperatures in the negative 14 degrees in the wintertime, and in the summertime, you get in the 90s. Those are what we call physical hazards. And NASA has to plan for these physical hazards in outer space. So evaluating the hazards, this is the real rocket science. This is what I do. We as industrial hygienists, we can do things as a qualitative analysis or a quantitative analysis to evaluate those hazards. NASA does the same thing for the astronauts in outer space to protect them. There's a thing called the 5-gas meter. I actually have a small one right here that does a single gas. And we use these things to evaluate the gases in the air. We use pH paper for liquids or a Geiger counter for radioactive materials. This is really rocket science. So industrial hygiene like to monitor everything. And we do this, and sometimes all at once. This guy wasn't real happy with me because after wearing this stuff all day, he was a little tired of it, and I found out real quick is don't make your subjects mad because they won't do this for you anymore. So I went back to monitoring with just one thing at a time. There are controls that are put in place, like the incident command system. When there's an incident, you've heard the word incident commander. These are things that we use to control those hazards that are out there, both physical and chemical. A spacesuit protects that astronaut from the physical hazards of outer space. In the safety world, we have these hierarchy of controls. Eliminate the hazard is the best thing you can do. If you can't eliminate it, can you substitute for a less hazard? Engineering out the controls. Administrative controls is where you put different people in jobs. And PPE, or personal protective equipment, is your last level of defense. So in Maine, we used to have a nuclear power plant here, and it got decommissioned after 30 years of activity. The state took the stance, we're going to eliminate this hazardous power plant. They tore it all down, put it in rail cars, shipped it out west, and it's gone. That's a brownfield now in Wiscasset. That's eliminating a hazard. So substitution is using it like a water-based solvent versus an oil-based solvent. It's less hazardous. It's a small hazard, but it's less than the oil-based solvent. NASA does this with water landings. They used to drop the spaceships into the ocean. They don't do that anymore. They land them at Edwards Air Force Base. It's much safer for the crew, and it's much safer for the equipment. They get it back. Lab hoods are engineering control. This car here is, those airbags are engineering controls. Audio control, when something happens, this happened to be my wife's van that was hit, the airbags deploy, that's an engineering control. Administrative controls are your training, your signs, your labeling, even job rotation. NASA rotates their astronauts to outer space. They always bring them back to Earth because they're afraid of weightlessness being a problem for astronauts over a long period of time. And then you get to your frontier of last level of protection is, we call it PPE, which is personal protective equipment. Level A suits, firefighters wear an SCBA on their back, hard hats, earplugs. These are the things that protect the people, but it's your last level of defense. So I rest my case that industrial hygiene is rocket science. We anticipate, we recognize, we evaluate the hazards, and then we control them. So we are, I call it AREC, A-R-E-C, and I really believe that industrial hygiene is really rocket science.